Okay, we got it. So we're looking at Pirkei Avos, which means we're finding ourselves in the summer months. It's good to have a reminder. We need reminding where we are, which season we are. The seasons are pretty much all the same indoors and slightly different outdoors. But thank God, Baruch Hashem, we are here together and we are looking at Mishneh 16, Tes Zayin, in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers. So that's 15, 16. So the Mishnah reads as follows. Rabban Gamliel Haya Omer, Rabban Gamliel said, Asay l'charav, provide for yourself a teacher, v'histalek min hasafek, and free yourself of doubt, v'al tarbe la'aser umadus, and do not tithe by guesswork, even giving in excess of the required amount. So the first thing that you may notice over here, I'll refresh your memory in case you don't remember, is that we were learning from sages during a period of time where the leadership was in pairs. So the last few lessons that we learned were from Hillel and Shammai. And then we took from each one and learned their lesson specifically, but we were introduced to the leaders in pairs. Now we're moving on from that period of time, and now we're introduced to the teaching here of Rabban Gamliel. So no more do we have the period of pairs of leaders, and also before this there was no title. We didn't give a title. It was Hillel and Shammai, right? It was Shmaya and Avtalion. Today, when we refer to somebody who is in a position of greatness, we give them a title. But during this period of time, it was the custom that that the leader was referred to without any title. So this Rabban Gamliel is the last. Here we have Rabban Gamliel is the first one now that we give a title to, Rabban Gamliel. Now he served as a leader during the last few decades before the destruction of the Second Temple, and he enacted many rules for the sake of Tikkun Olam, reparation of the world, and for the sake of peace. So, for example, and this is something that we take for granted today, for example, he insisted that Jews greet all of their neighbors and be specifically careful to greet their neighbors who were not Jewish, to make sure that they would support the people who were poor, who were not Jewish, to visit the sick people who were not Jewish, and so on. And he said it's important for the sake of peace, even though we have this concept of charity starting at home, which makes perfect sense. but yet we have to be proactive in terms of creating a peaceful atmosphere. He also introduced a very interesting custom that we still also keep until today, and that is that every Jewish person should be buried in very simple shrouds. We take that for granted today. When a burial is done in a kosher way, the deceased is buried. The Jewish way of burying a person is that they should wear shrouds. Before the time of Rabban Gamliel, somebody who could afford would be buried in clothing that was it depended on what they could afford. Today, we know that the way a person is buried is it's the same across the board. The shrouds are very simple. The box is very simple. And this stemmed from this period of time with Rabban Gamliel. And why? Because he didn't want people to have the pressure of having to come up with sums of money that they couldn't afford, and therefore he instituted this custom. When he passed away, even though he was a renowned leader, and at that time it was a shocking thing that he would be buried in such a way, but he insisted that when he was buried, he be buried in very simple shrouds. And the Talmud tells us that Rabban Gamliel was so great, and after he passed away, it says that the glory of the Torah ceased, purity died, and austerity was no more. And that after his death, a weakness descended upon the world, and the students of Torah no longer studied standing up. It used to be the practice that to honor the Torah, they would, the Torah, the people who were studying Torah would stand when they were studying. But after he passed away, people didn't have the koyach. They weren't able to do that. And that practice came to an end. Rabban Gamliel is referred to as Rabban Gamliel the Elder because he had a grandson, also Rabban Gamliel, who was a very great sage and is referred to. So in the Talmud, he's referred to as Rabban Gamliel the Elder. Now let's look at the first thing that he tells us in this Mishnah. He tells us Aseh lecha Rav. Now, what exactly does he mean when he says Aseh lecha Rav? Make for yourself, provide for yourself a Rav. He's actually not talking here about a Rav to study Torah. We already saw in Mishneh Vav that that Rabbi Yeshua ben Parachia gave us that lesson. Here, he is talking about he's talking here not about a Rav to study Torah from. Here he is talking about a Rav that can answer questions of halacha, of Jewish law, that we see, because it says right afterwards, v'histalek min hasafek, and free yourself of doubt. And a person might think that it's not important to know exactly what the halacha wants from me if I err on the side of caution. If I'm going to be more stringent than the Torah demands of me, maybe that is not an issue. But that is not a good idea. And why is it not a good idea? Because if somebody does that, then what will happen is that they will proclaim that something that's really permitted is forbidden. So one might say, so what? So what's wrong with that? What's wrong with saying that something is prohibited and not using it in order to be careful and to make sure that we don't use something that is prohibited? But the Torah tells us that everything that is created in this world was created by Hashem and was created for us to use and to elevate. And if we do not use something because we're not sure whether it's permitted or not, so now what have we done? We have lost the opportunity to elevate that object. So let's say, for example, somebody messes up in the kitchen and they're cooking dinner and they put a dairy spoon into a meat pot. And instead of calling the Rav, they decide, you know what, it's treif and I'm just going to throw it out. But that's called Baal Tashchis. That's called destroying something that was created with a purpose by Hashem. And now we were given the opportunity to use that for a good reason, to elevate it, to eat it, to make a bracha, to use the energy to serve Hashem. And now we have thrown it away. You know, as I'm talking about this, I'm being reminded of a story that I haven't heard in a long time, so I may be forgetting some of the details, but it's a story in Judaism. We believe in reincarnation, that every neshama, every soul comes down to this world with a purpose, and sometimes, actually, most times, the soul doesn't fulfill its entire purpose, and so it has to come back down into this world. Actually, every neshama has to complete all the mitzvahs, the 613 commandments, and that doesn't always happen. So what happens is the neshama keeps coming back until it finishes what it needs to finish. Sometimes a neshama will come back not inside of a human being, but it can come back into a creature or an object. And this story that I'm thinking of, that I'm being reminded of, is about a neshama that needed rectification, and it needed rectification in the area of making brachas. And Hashem sent a neshama back, not into a body, but actually into a grain, into a piece of grain. And that grain was planted, and that grain was, it grew, and it was harvested, and all the time that the piece of grain was growing and it was in the ground, it was praying that it would be redeemed, that ultimately where would it end up? And so the farmer brings in the produce, and then somebody comes to buy the produce, and the grain is praying all the while that it's going to end up in the right place. And ultimately, the grain ends up being made into a pint of beer. And the and the grain is praying and praying and praying that it will be bought by somebody who will make a bracha on the grain. And what happened? It was bought by somebody who could have made a bracha on it, and ultimately they blew it. They didn't make the bracha, and the neshama of this grain had to start its cycle all over again. Hopefully I got the story right. If I didn't, the gist of the story is that everything in creation was created for the glory of Hashem, and therefore we shouldn't wing it when it comes to Jewish law. We should make sure that we have somebody to go to ask a question. What's interesting actually is that even if the answer is no, that also elevates the object, because now that object became the conduit for the conversation about what is permitted and what is prohibited in Torah law. So it's very important. Asay l'charav, and Rabban Gamliel underlines histalek min hasafek. We should never be in a position where we have doubt. Doubt is a terrible way to be, because when a person is in doubt and they're indecisive, it takes away their koach, it takes away their strength. So when Rabbi Gamliel says to us, Asay l'charav, choose a mentor, it's not just good enough to choose a mentor. He says, make sure that the mentor you're going to choose will help you to achieve that you take away doubt in your life. Sometimes we may pick a mentor for the wrong reasons. We may pick a mentor because they're popular. We may pick a mentor because they're affluent, and so on. Rabbi Gamliel says, make sure that we pick a mentor that is going to help us to stick away from doubt. And what is the kind of person that fits that bill? That is the kind of person that doesn't have doubts themselves, that one can see that the person who they choose as a Rav is not wishy-washy, is very settled in their beliefs, and their behavior is a reflection of that. Now, the end of the teaching, but al tarba la'aseh umadus, and don't tithe by guesswork. You know, there is in halacha, in Jewish law, we have to give part of our produce to the Levium, to the Levites. So the farmer had to take Misa, they had to take a tenth of their produce, and once they took the tenth of the produce, then they would be allowed to eat the rest. So what would happen if a person said, you know, I'm not quite sure how much is Misa, how much is a tenth, I'm going to give the Levite more or less. So if they give less, then now their produce is prohibited to them because they haven't given enough. And what if they give more? So now the Levite cannot eat the Misa. Why? Because mixed in with the Misa is also regular produce, and the regular produce cannot be eaten until Misa is taken from it. And since it was mixed with the Misa, it's not part of the rest of the produce. You see, what the farmer took, and he took a tenth, is now permitted to him. But if he gives 11 parts to the Levite, now that extra part is not left behind with him, and it hasn't been included in what's permitted. So that's why it's very important that the person doesn't wing it. You know, when something's really, really important, we take the extra effort to make sure that we do things correctly. And Rabban Gamliel tells us over here, if we want to make sure to do things in the right way, we should all have a Rav, asay lecha Rav, make for yourself a mentor. The Rebbe spoke about this many, many times, that it's so important for all of us to have a mentor in life, because either we are too strict with ourselves or we're too giving with ourselves. If we're too strict with ourselves, then we can push ourselves over the top. If we are not, if we don't push ourselves enough, then we don't live up to our potential. When we bring in a third party, that removes doubt, because the third party, the Rav, the mentor, is able to listen to our questions, to listen to our doubts, and come from an objective place and help us to make a good decision. And this is something that every single one of us should do. And it's interesting because it says over here, asay lecha Rav. Asay means to make, we translate it as provide for yourself a Rav. Asay, make for yourself a mentor. Oftentimes a person will say, I can't find somebody that fits the bill, so I'm not going to bother with a mentor. But Rabban Gamliel says that's not a good excuse. It doesn't matter if the person maybe even knows less than you do, or maybe the person is on a different level than you would have liked for your mentor to be. Still, asay lecha Rav, make them your mentor, because every single person needs to have a mentor. Even the greatest tzaddik needs to have somebody to come from an objective place and help us and keep us away from safek, keep us away from doubt. Actually, talking about doubt, that was really the story with Amalek. When the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, Amalek came and attacked the Jewish people. Now, they weren't the first to attack us, and they're not the last to attack us. Why was there such a harsh reaction to Amalek that actually every single day we say one of the 6 things we have to remember is what Amalek did to you on the way when you left Mitzrayim? And the sages tell us that the name Amalek has the same gematria, the same numerical value as hasafek, which is doubt. That everybody in the world feared, starting up with Bnei Yisrael, with the Jewish people, until Amalek came and created a doubt by attacking the Jewish people, by attacking Bnei Yisrael. So Amalek is that concept that we still live with today, which is the concept of doubt, which is a very destructive force. And that's why we have the mitzvah to do away with Amalek, to eradicate the memory of Amalek. We have to get rid of doubt. And that's what Rabban Gamliel taught us. Mishneh Yud Zayin, Mishneh 17, Shimon beno Omer, Shimon, his son, taught. Kol yamai gadalti bein hachachamim. All my life, all my days, I grew up among the sages. V'lo matzasi leguf tov mishtika. And I didn't find anything better for the body than silence. V'lo hamidrash ika ela hamaisa. And Torah study, not study, but deed is the essential thing. And whoever engages in excessive talk causes sin. Now we see over here, after Rabban Gamliel came his son Shimon. How come Rabban Gamliel is called Rabban Gamliel and his son is called Shimon? He was called Shimon as long as his father was alive, because of kibbud av v'em, because of respect for his father. So as long as his father was alive, even though he was a teacher and he was a Rebbe, but nevertheless, he's referred to here as Shimon. Now he was leader during the time he led the Jewish people alongside the high priests, Hanan ben Hanan and Yeshua ben Gamla, during the generation of the destruction and the war against the Romans. And it was he who said, we do not impose an enactment on the community if a majority of them are unable to follow it. So he's a very well-known sage, and he is also one of the 10 martyrs who were murdered by the Romans. We read about them in the service of Yom Kippur, of the 10 martyrs, and Rabban Shimon was one of those martyrs. Now, what did he tell us? He said, all my days I grew up amongst the sages. Kol yomai, all my days I grew up amongst the sages. And even as he became a great sage in his own right, he never became haughty, and he always gave honor to others. And that's the meaning of Kol Yamai Gadalti Bein HaChachamim. All of my days, even when he became great in his own rights, he still considered himself Gadalti, he still considered himself growing up. When he was among other sages, he acted with great humility. And the other thing we see is Kol Yamai Gadalti Bein HaChachamim is what he's teaching us when he says, all my days I grew up among the sages, is that we should do the same. We should surround ourselves with Torah scholars, because when we surround ourselves with Torah scholars, we don't only learn lessons from them when they are giving a discourse, but we actually learn from them in their everyday life, how they live what they are learning in the Torah. Now, Rabbi Shimon says that what did he find the best thing? He said, Lo matzasi leguf, I didn't find anything greater for the body than what? Than silence. There's nothing better than silence. So what does that mean? He says, So one way of looking at it is velo matzasi leguf. I didn't find for the body, meaning that during my life, I didn't concentrate on the guf, on the body. That wasn't my priority in life. What was my priority? My priority was my neshama, spirituality. And when does the neshama get a chance to have a look in? When is the neshama given that opportunity to express itself? Is when there is silence, meaning that the body is quiet and the voice of the ears of the neshama is not drowned out by the voice of the demanding guf, of the demanding body. And there's a very important lesson here that Rabban Shimon is telling us. He's saying something, the sages tell us, we look at this Mishnah. He says, there's nothing better for a person than silence. And when specifically is it good to be silent? And the sages tell us that it's good to be silent when someone is berating you, when someone is treating you in a disrespectful way. That is the best advice, is not to react, not to respond. Why? Because this is an opportunity for us to practice the concept of humility, that we are receiving an insult and we are being quiet. We don't feel the need to be the blabbermouth and full of ourselves to respond. And the sages tell us that a person who is quiet in the face of an insult, in the face of disrespect, it says, they join in the congregation of Hashem. Why so? Why so? Because it's godly to respond that way. Every single day, people disrespect Hashem. People disrespect God. And what happens? Nothing. Nothing happens. You know, it's interesting. You know, Hashem makes us see things. I received an email from a Jewish film club, and they sent out some free movies, and I clicked on one of them, and it was a movie about a woman who kept kosher her whole life. Her whole life she kept kosher, and in her old age, she's having this conversation with herself about what's going to happen if she eats something not kosher. And actually in the story with Chava, how did Chava come to end up sinning? The first sin ever was because she added to the words of Hashem. And actually in the previous Mishnah, this is really very apropos to the previous Mishnah of Aseh L'Charav. We shouldn't wing it. We shouldn't add to the words of Hashem, because what happened? She said that Hashem said she's not allowed to touch the tree, but God never said that. God said you're not allowed to eat from the tree. So the serpent pushed her against the tree and she touched the tree. And what happened? Garnished. Nothing happened. So the Nachash said, well, nothing happened when you touched it, then you might as well eat it. And this little movie was this conversation that this woman was having. And this was really Amalek. It was doubt coming into her and saying, well, what's going to happen if you eat something not kosher? is God gonna strike you down and kill you? And she has this whole conversation with herself, and ultimately she ends up caving in and eating the non-kosher food. And guess what happened to her? Nothing happened, but something did happen. That Amalek got the better of her, that she had spent her entire life in this relationship with Hashem, and then ultimately, why did she come to that? Of course, I'm analyzing this as I'm listening to it. Why did she come to it? Because she didn't have the appreciation of the mitzvah. She didn't understand the mitzvah. It was something that, and it is amazing that she had kept this her whole life to be loyal to her tradition, but there's much more in our relationship with Hashem than the intellect. It goes much, much deeper than that. And that's why it's so important to have a Rav, so that we can bring more depth into our relationship with Hashem and keep ourselves on the straight and narrow. And here, what happens every single day, people disrespect Hashem. And what does Hashem do? Hashem doesn't do anything. So that's why it says that when a person controls themselves to be humble in the face of disrespect, that they are blessed and become one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because God knows exactly what they are going through, and they respond in a godly manner, just as God takes the disrespect and continues to be the giving and kind and good God that he is. So too, this is an opportune time for a person to work on themselves. And trust me, it's not easy. It's rough. We might have to practice and practice and practice, but ultimately we will get there. And the truth is, the best way to deal with the Yetzer Hara, with the evil inclination, is through silence, because we don't want to enter into this back and forth with the Yetzer Hara. The best thing to do is actually not to talk about it and not enter into this conversation. It's interesting. It says that a person who talks excessively, it's a sign that everything is not okay. And it's not that a person shouldn't talk. We've been given speech for a reason, but there are different kinds of speech. Actually, the Rambam says there are 5 categories of speech. There's required speech, such as the reading and studying of Torah. That's a mitzvah. So that's required speech. There's forbidden speech, such as false testimony, lies, gossip, curses, vulgarity. Those are forbidden speeches. Then there is repulsive speech. What's repulsive speech? That is speech which is neither beneficial nor harmful. Just idle gossip, idle chatter. That's what the Chachamim call it. The sages call it idle chatter. And people who are extremely pious try and avoid this kind of speech. Then there's desirable speech. What's desirable speech? That's speech that encourages the neshama towards higher ideals and discourages it from the opposite, which is through stories, through nigunim, melodies, songs, and so on. And then there is what's called permitted speech. Permitted speech is speech that's necessary for life. You need to eat, you need to drink, you got to go shopping, you got to do business, you got to answer the telephone and make sure everything is working. And these are the 5 categories of speech. So what we're learning from Rabban Shimon is that for sure, for definite, we should stick away from forbidden speech. We should certainly try and stay away from idle chatter, and permitted speech we should minimize and do as little as possible. There was once a great sage, and people noticed that he just didn't talk much. He didn't say much. He was a man of few words. And they asked him, why are you so quiet? And he explained this concept, this idea. He said there's different kinds of speeches, and of all the different kinds of speeches, there's only one really that I should be indulging in, and that's why I am a man of few words, and I save my speech for good things. The truth is, talking of speech, when we say over here in this Mishnah, when Rabban Shimon says that there's nothing better for the neshama, for the body actually, than silence, he's not talking about speech that elevates a person. He's talking about the other kinds of speech. And we should remember, speech is a great gift that Hashem has given to us, and it's a gift that we should use very wisely. And we see, even when it comes to learning Torah, what is the lesson here? Lo ha-midrash ika ela ha-maisa, not study, but deed is the essential thing. So, of course, we said already that using words for study is not only permitted, but is a good thing. But just to use those words, what's the point? The point is the ma'aseh, the action. And that's why it's so important, when we learn Torah, or we daven, or we engage in a conversation with someone else, and we're using good words, and we feel very inspired by those words, we should remember this teaching, Lo ha-midrash ika ela ha-maisa, that it's not the study that is the most important, but the maisa, the action. And therefore, any time we feel inspired by a speech, by something we've read, by study, what should we do? We should immediately translate it into action. It could be something as simple as walking over to the tzedakah box and putting a coin in the tzedakah box. It could be something as simple as showing kindness to another person. But we should always take that inspiration and immediately translate it into an action. Why? Because lo ha-midrash ika, what's the purpose of the midrash? What's the purpose of the study? Of the whole object of the exercise is what? Is the ma'aseh, is the action. And we should act upon it. What do we say? Strike while the iron is hot, right? Before we lose that passion, we should act upon it. We should run and do a mitzvah. Rabban Gamliel ben Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Mishnah 18, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Kayam. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, the world endures by virtue of three things. Al Hadin, on justice, Ba'al Ha'emes, and on truth, Ba'al Hashalom, and on peace, Shenema, like it says, Emes or Mishpat Shalom Shiftu B'Sha'arechem, as it says in Zechariah, administer truth and justice of peace in your gates. Now, this Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel was the junior, right? We mentioned already, this was, you had Rabban Gamliel, which was we learned from Mishneh 16. His grandson was Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, he taught us that the world, if you remember, you might remember when we first started this chapter, we said a similar expression. We said, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Omeid. The world stands on three things. And that was Torah, prayer, and acts of kindness. But now it's a little slightly different expression. We don't say Ha'olam Omeid, the world stands, meaning when we say the world stands, we mean that the world it's founded on those three things. Here we're saying if we want the world to continue to exist, we need these three things. And what are these three things? These three things are justice. What does that mean, justice? Justice means that if somebody is guilty, then they need to be convicted. And if somebody is innocent, they need to be exonerated. It's as simple as that. It's not which lawyer has the best wit and the quickest tongue. It's justice. And what is justice based on? That brings us to the next one. Emes, truth. There needs to be honesty amongst people. It's very important to have honesty and peace. Shalom. We see that there needs to be peace between people. There needs to be peace between countries. There needs to be peace, right? So, so these are very, very important things. And especially as the times that we're finding ourselves in today, to talk about peace in the world and justice in the world. It has to be, justice has to be based on truth. It has to be based on something that is immutable, that doesn't move. Okay. So we say al-hadin, on justice. And if we look at the discussion that Rabbi Shimon had with Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon said, had they been on the Sanhedrin, no man would have ever received the death penalty. And Rabbi Shimon responded that that is not a good thing. That's not justice. And what would be the result of that? the result of that would be much more murder in the world. Al ha'emes, on truth, Rabbi Shimon points out that peace is so important that Yosef's brothers actually bent the truth in order for there to be peace. So peace takes precedence over everything. What happened? After Yaakov's death, the brothers were afraid that he would take revenge on them. And they didn't want, now they genuinely cared for him, and they didn't want to put him in a position that could cause him anguish. He already had suffered so much because of them. And so in order to bring about peace, what did they do? They bent the truth a little bit. And they said that Yaakov had instructed them to tell Joseph to forgive them for their sin. So we see that sometimes the truth can be stretched a little bit for the sake of peace, but nevertheless, one should not accustom themselves to practices of things that are not true. There's a story told in the Gemara of a sage, Rav, that his wife she didn't treat him nicely. She was mean, and she treated him in a terrible way. She was so mean that whatever he wanted, she would give him the opposite. So if he said he wanted meat for supper, she'd prepare a milk meal. If he said he wanted to stay in, she would schlep him out. That was how she operated. So their son, his son, Rav Chia's son, figured this out. He watched how his mother behaved, and he figured it out. So what did he do? He had rachmanas on his father. He had pity on his father. So he would go and tell his mother what his father wanted, and but he realized that she was going to do the opposite. So he would figure out what does his father want, and then he would tell her the opposite, and then she would prepare that for him. So when Rav found out about this, he was very impressed. First of all, he was impressed that his son had kibbud up the aim like that, and he was impressed with his seichel, but he told him, no, I want you to stop doing this. Why? I don't want you to become accustomed to saying falsehood. We create patterns, and it's important that the patterns we create are patterns of good habits. Now, we talk about MS. What's the opposite of MS? The opposite of MS is sheker. Sheker is falsehood. In Hebrew, sheker has 3 letters, shin, kuf, and resh. And if you look at those letters, they all are wobbly. They all don't stand properly. The shin, as it's written like this, right? It stands on a point. It's not solid. The kuf, it has just one leg. The resh, it has one leg. It doesn't stand properly. And MS has the 3 letters, Aleph, Mem, and Taf, and they all are firmly planted on the ground. So truth stands and falsehood cannot. And it's up to the judge. You see, that's why the judge has a very important job, because the judge has to bring about justice, but he also has to maintain shalom. He also has to maintain peace, and that is a very difficult thing. But that's why it says that a judge is given siyata deshmaya. A judge is given help from Hashem to be able to balance these things and to come up with a solution that is able to maintain peace in the world. And then we just finished this first chapter of Pirkei, Avos, of ethics of the fathers. And whenever we finish a chapter, we say a Mishneh. It's not part of ethics of the fathers, it's part of Makos. And the Mishneh that we say is Rabbi Hanania ben Akashia Omer. Rabbi Hanania, the son of Akashia, said, Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakos es Yisrael. The Holy One, blessed be He, wished to make Israel meritorious. Lefichach hirba lahem Torah and mitzvahs. Therefore, He increased for them Torah and mitzvahs. Shenema, like it says, Hashem chafetz leman tzidko. God desired for the sake of His, that means Bnei Yisrael's righteousness, Yagdil Torah b'yadid, to make the Torah great and glorious. The reason Hashem gave us so many mitzvahs, and each mitzvah branches out to another mitzvah, and so on and so forth, is because Hashem wanted every single one of us to have an opportunity, to have so many opportunities to fulfill mitzvahs and to fill our lives with goodness and to elevate our neshamas, which in turn elevates our surroundings and elevates the entire world. And that's why the sages say that every Jew is filled with mitzvahs like the seeds of a pomegranate, because Hashem has set it up in that way, that there are so many opportunities for us to do mitzvahs, and rather than, God forbid, to look at them as burdens, we should recognize all these mitzvahs for what they are. They are treasures, they are opportunities, they give us the chance to live our potential. Hashem should bless us all with justice and peace and all that is good. And we should use our words to express kindness and acceptance and tolerance, because that is what Hashem demands. It's what Hashem loves. Maybe some of you have seen there is either on the emails or on your WhatsApps, but there is an encounter that the Rebbe had with Mayor Dinkins during a very difficult time in New York. And the mayor talks to the Rebbe about bringing peace between the two sides. And the Rebbe says to the mayor, there are no two sides. We are one nation under one God, and Hashem created us all, and He loves us all. And that's why there needs to be peace. So Hashem should help everybody feel that and realize that. And Bezrat Hashem, please God, we will experience this peace in our world. If we can bring peace into our own hearts, it spreads. It starts with us. It starts with the individual, and it spreads from there. God bless.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful Shabbos, everybody. And
You too, honey.
we'll meet again. Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you.